Welcome to PausePoint, the podcast, your ultimate destination for reclaiming your time, revitalizing your spirit, and saying no to burnout. I'm Felicia Wiley, CEO and founder of PausePoint, and I'm here to ignite your journey towards a more balanced and mindful life. Join us each week as we delve into practical tips, inspiring stories, and expert advice designed to integrate mindfulness into your daily life. We'll explore mental health tips, discover ways to strengthen work-life balance, and find methods to reduce your stress. Whether you're new to mindfulness or seeking to deepen your practice, we're here to spark action. It's time to reclaim our time, take more breaks, and infuse our lives with moments of peace and rejuvenation. Join us starting July 15th for our debut season, where we'll share practical tips, inspiring stories, and expert advice to help you thrive in today's fast-paced world. Let's create a mindful world, one pause at a time. Welcome to PausePoint, the podcast. In today's episode, we delve into the profound impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on mental health professionals and the ongoing necessity for adaptive changes in the post-pandemic world. Dr. Gerri Connaught shares insights on the critical role of self-care for mental health workers and the power of community engagement in fostering systemic changes for better mental health care. We explore how embracing community support and advocating for structural reforms can enhance the mental wellness of marginalized populations, providing a roadmap for recovery in challenging times. Join us as we uncover strategies to navigate and thrive in the evolving landscape of mental health. Gerri, welcome to PausePoint, the podcast. Can you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad to just be a part of this and to speak with you more. But yeah, a little bit about myself. So I am a Brooklyn native, born and raised in Brooklyn. My family is West Indian, so my family come from a powerful island called Grenada in the Caribbean. They were immigrants, and even though they were born there and my brother was born there, I was born here in Brooklyn. I have been in the field of mental health for, it will be 9 years next month. So it's really exciting, really cool. I can't believe that I've been doing this for 9 years, but it's been amazing, such an amazing journey. I got interested in social work actually through psychology. I was a psychology major first in undergrad, and then a mentor of mine actually introduced social work to me, which at the time I didn't know what it was. But she was like, I think you'd be interested in it because it really combines mental health with advocacy and social justice, and that seems to be your lane and like what you're interested in. And I was like, I am, like, and ended up looking into it, and I fell in love with it. That was where I was supposed to be. So even though I majored in psych, I transitioned into social work and I got my master's, and then just graduated this past May with my PhD in social work. And so here I am. Yeah.
Congratulations on graduating. Now, you said that you have been doing this for about 9 years now. What is the highest high and the lowest low of those 9 years?
Oh, man. Okay, like on a personal level or like on a professional?
Professional level.
Okay. Professionally, I would say the lowest low probably was COVID, because I was able to get a firsthand glance of just how much it was really impacting everyone on a national, global level, really. And I don't think we've even fully recovered from the impact of COVID. I always tell that to people and to my clients especially, because there's this idea, I think, in our culture of, oh, COVID, the pandemic is over. And so we're back to normal, quote unquote, whatever normal is. And the truth of it is that no, it definitely changed a lot of things about not only how we work and how we live, but our mental health in many ways, and how we cope, and the different ways in which we manage our day to day. And I think we're still really dealing with the after effects of it. I think we're doing better, but I think there's still a lot of ways in which it shows up, whether it's heightened anxiety, heightened depression, just making it more challenging just to operate in the normal day to day, that I think a lot of people often take for granted, and we often blame ourselves as what's wrong with me? Why am I not like managing the everyday stressors like the way that I should be? Really more, I think, of a structural thing than it is actually a personal characteristic. So I think that would be the low. And also just seeing how much the pandemic had on the impact of mental health care workers and just health service workers, period, like doctors and nurses and anyone really in the helping professions. It really, I think, took a toll on all of our mental health, especially if you're responsible for the mental health of someone else or the health of someone else. I think that would be the lowest low. The highest high, I think, is honestly every day that I do this work would be my highest high because I really love what I do. I really love working with the clients that I work with, but I also just really love being in a profession where my role is to really guide and really provide people with resources to be their best selves. That's the best way that I describe what social work means to me is really allowing people to be the best fullest versions of themselves and helping guide them on that journey to that. So to me, that's my highest high every single day.
I love your highest high, and it's absolutely amazing because when I could just see the glow on your face when you're talking about just the work that you do. So I know that you generally enjoy it, but I'm very curious. As a mental health worker, it is your job, like you said, to bring out the best in others. How do you do that and take on that mental load? Because as you're talking with people, they're telling you their problems. How do you put up a blocker where it doesn't necessarily impact you and your own mental health?
Yeah, that's such a great question. Honestly, it's something that I've experimented a lot with over the years, and I don't know that I necessarily have it down pat, but I think I have it to a great space where I'm able to balance taking care of others and taking care of myself. And I always start from the mentality of I need to take care of myself in order for me to then be present and take care or hold that space for other people. So really it starts with me. And whatever I then share with my clients on in terms of what I tell them, what I share with them in terms of resources, what I share with them in terms of how to take care of yourself, how to manage certain things, I don't tell them from a place of like, I'm telling you what to do. Here's what I learned in the textbook. Here's what I learned in school. It's really from a place of I've tried this myself. I would never like recommend that I haven't tried or done myself to someone else. And so that's where I start from. I start really from me. So I'm always making sure that I have balance as much as I can within my own life, that I am taking the time to take care of myself, whatever that means. So that could mean meditating every day, doing the rituals that really pour back into me. Exercising is a big one for me. I'm really big on working out because that's my way of releasing all of that energy that I'm taking in throughout the day from different people. Going for walks in nature. I love being in nature. I love being near the beach. That's like my favorite place to be, but definitely near parks, near trees. Those are the things that kind of pour back into my energy. Making sure that I'm sleeping, which is something I did
Yes.
not, I don't think anybody ever gets enough in this day and age, but I know I definitely did not get enough of it over the past few years in school and doing clinical work. So I'm very big now on making sure that I'm taking naps. I totally support naps throughout the day. I'm making sure that I'm sleeping as much as I can and resting because I do believe that is a big part of our health and our mental health as well. And then other parts are things like just socializing, just being, hanging out with friends, being in community with people. That's a big part of my healing as well. So I find these different ways to make sure that I'm balanced and I'm good. And I also recognizing like within me so I'm very aware of like when I need to slow it down, when I need to take a break, when I need to call out. I'm aware of what that looks like within myself when I'm burning out really quickly or like I just need to take a pause. And so I honor that. I try to honor that as much as I can because I can't tell my clients, like, I need you to pause, and I'm not even following my own advice. So that's why I'm very intentional about like how I take care of myself. And then I use that to then share that with my clients.
Now, going back to, you said you have this self awareness. Did you always have this self awareness, or was there a pivotal part of your life where you're like, oh no, I need to make some serious changes?
A little bit of both. So I think I've always been generally very aware of myself and my body and like what it needs when it needs it. But there's definitely times because of the society that we live in, because of the workplace places and spaces that I've been in, where I've had to really override that a lot of times. So even though I may have been aware, it didn't mean that like I wasn't pushing myself to the limit at times. Or there were definitely nights where I was pulling all-nighters when I should not have been.
Guilty. Yeah.
Or I'm like, okay, yeah, I can keep going. I can keep doing this and saying yes to all of these things that I had no business saying yes to, but it felt like I needed to in order to keep up with the grind and keep up with the hustle and the deadlines and getting all of these things done. So it's really been, I think, over the years, a balancing act of how do I stray away less from burning the midnight oil and really listening to my body. Even though my body's telling me things, I didn't always listen to it. I think that was especially true in academia because academia has a certain hustle and it has a certain rhythm and grind culture and state of urgency that it's always operating in. And when you're in it, especially as a student or a faculty member, it's very difficult to separate from that. It has to be very intentional. And I didn't always know how to do that. It wasn't until I would say the later years of me being in the program where I was like, oh, this is not sustainable because I felt myself really getting exhausted and drained and burned out. And when you're in that state, you're not necessarily yourself. Like I was more irritable.
Yeah.
I don't want to be around anybody. I just want to like shut it down. There would be times where I would just be like, don't talk to me. Don't email me.
Don't look at me.
Don't call me. Don't look at me. Don't forget me. Please forget me for a while because I don't want to say yes to anything. I don't want to do any of these things. And so I really had to pay attention to that. And I'll tell you too, I think a big pivotal part of me being more intentional was actually grief. During the pandemic and during I'm going to say the last 2 or 3 years of the program, my brother passed away unexpectedly. And it really forced me to really slow it down and really not slow it down to the point, stop and reevaluate because there's so much more to life than this. And you need to find a way to live it in a way that's in alignment with who you are. And luckily for me, that pivotal moment of really trying to figure out how to do that came as I was finishing the program and where I had a little bit more flexibility. So that's not always afforded to us, but I'm glad that I was able to really shift it. So now I am a lot more intentional about listening to my body, about listening to what I need and really honoring that however I can. And I'm still figuring it out. It's still an adjustment because once you've been programmed all your life in a school setting and you've been in school your most of your life, you've been in academic structures all of your life, you're really programmed to operate and grind a certain way. And so for me, for the past few months, I've been very intentional about deprogramming myself and figuring out what works best for me and my nervous system and my state of mind.
Well, first and foremost, my condolences to you and your family on the loss of your brother.
Thank you so much.
But you talked about this deprogramming. Can you walk us through that a little bit more?
Yeah. So the deprogramming, at least for me, I know it may look different for people, but for me personally, it's really been doing the opposite of everything that I have been doing for the past of this program, and even probably longer. I've been in school longer than 5 years, 11 years. So it's been a while, right? So it's been purposely like doing the opposite of those things. So what does that look like? Academia, as I mentioned, it operates in a state of like urgency. And sometimes it's false urgency. It's things that are not really that important that everyone wants a response to really quickly. Everyone thinks it's like the highest priority. Right. And so I've been very intentional about sometimes it's little things like I'm not going to respond to this email right away. I might have seen it. I know that it's there and I might or even have an answer right away. But purposely, I'm not going to respond right away. I'm going to take some time to really think about it and really think about what I'm getting into, what I'm saying yes to, if I even want to do this thing before I even respond. Right. So I'll give myself a couple of hours. Sometimes it's a couple of days before I'm like, okay, yes, I will do this, or no, I cannot, I don't have the capacity to. So things like that, things in terms of being very intentional about what I do say yes to. So what projects I'm saying yes to, do I have the capacity for it? Really reevaluating that. And also just doing things that excite me, right? A lot of the times in academia, you're doing things that are like, you gotta do. You may not necessarily want to, but out of just your requirements and responsibilities, you have to say yes. So a lot of it has been really thinking about, am I actually excited about this thing? Do I actually want to do this? And if not, let me actually share that opportunity with someone else who would be interested in doing it. And I'm going to step out and say no, or I'm going to say yes. If it's not a full 100, I'm not saying yes to it. So things like that, being very intentional about when I need time off, right? Academia, you're always driving it and you're always going. And that's so in contrast to doing the clinical work side of things, where you do have to be very mindful of you and your body in order to then be there for other people. So I'm very intentional about checking in with myself constantly. What do I need right now? Do I need a break? Do I need a day off? Do I need a vacation, right? Do I need an extended period of time? Do I need to just pause, right? Even in terms of like how I schedule my day, it's so different. Like I used to have back to back to back meetings for the entire day. That does not sit well. I don't do well with that. I never really have, but I pushed through it for the sake of just doing what I needed to do. Now I'm more intentional about like creating breaks and pauses for myself throughout the day in order to reset, reground, and like then come back at it however I can. Even the hours that I work, I'm still trying to figure this part out as well. But like working like a typical 9 to 5 where I'm like constantly grinding, that does not work for me. Right? I'm the type of person where all I need is like a good solid 4 or 5 hours and I can produce. But then after that, I need to rest and I need to break. That's a little bit harder for me. I'm still trying to figure out how to navigate that, but I'm aware of that now. Of that typical 9 to 5 schedule doesn't necessarily align with how I operate or being my best productive self. I need shorter intervals of time and then I need a lot of rest in between. So all of those things are like how I'm deprogrammed. And I would say like the biggest part of that or the biggest theme throughout all of that is really resting more. But like finding the time to pause, finding the time to nap, but it doesn't even have to look like napping. It could just mean going for that walk and taking a break, going to the park, creating that time for me to shut down a bit and really turn off all the devices, turn off the computer, turn off my cell phone, and really just have that time for myself to just be in my own space. And that I think is the biggest way for me of deprogramming, because academia does not allow you to rest, period.
There's so much to dive in here. I think I want to go back to that false urgency. Everyone wants you to do something and they want you to do it now because it's just like the most important thing ever. Where do you think false urgency stems from?
Oh, that's a great question. So also, yes, I'm referencing academia because that's the world that I come from, but corporate America absolutely runs, I think, on that same type of urgent schedule, and that it has the same characteristics of academia in those ways. I think the false sense of urgency honestly comes from, I'm going to say it, but it's all interlooped and they're all interconnected. I think it comes from capitalism and I think it comes from white supremacy culture. And so when you're operating within white supremacy culture, where you are taught that your worth is based off of what you're able to produce, it's based off of you competing with others constantly. It's based off of your amount of productivity or your accomplishments and what you achieve. When your whole identity and way of operating is tied into that, then everything becomes urgent because you're like, I need to do this and this to make sure that I am just staying afloat. Not even forget about even just like achieving and trying to be great. I just want to stay afloat. And then it's also, I want to be great at this and I want to be the best at this. And I want to bump other people in their spots in order to get to the top of this mountain or whatever it is. And so I think white supremacy culture has taught us, along with capitalism, that you also always have to be grinding. You always have to be hustling. You cannot say no. There's no opportunity that you should say no to, right? You need to be waking up at 5 a.m. in order be great and like all of these things that sure might be motivational to some people, but we are also human beings. We're not machines. We burn out. It's not sustainable for us. So I think that's where a lot of that false sense of urgency, but also a lot of other characteristics like competitiveness, always having to be the best, or our identities being so tied up in what it is that we do and what we're producing, instead of our identities being tied into who we just inherently are as people.
Once again, so much to dive in here, but I'm glad you brought this up because this is what your research is based off of. It's on, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's on the intersection of like race and wellness. And earlier you mentioned that your body doesn't necessarily work with that 9 to 5 schedule. Like that 9 to 5 schedule was actually created way back when, I think it was in the 1800s, when the government saw that factory workers, manufacturers, they were working like hundreds of hours a week, and they're like, oh my gosh, no, we can't have this. So then they like coded in this 9 to 5, and that's basically been like the standard. But like you were saying, it's about productivity. It's about how much can these people grind through that hamster wheel and deliver. And American culture in particular, it's very hustle driven. It's very, one thing, I've done my fair bit of traveling, and one thing that I always notice is that Americans will always be the first to ask me, what do you do for work? Within the second question, what's your name? Where are you from? And then what do you do for work? Because it's that ingrained in their identity.
It's so true. And it's wild too, Vigai, because I think a big part of having this hustle culture is that it doesn't allow you time to really dream and to imagine. Right? A lot of our creativity, a lot of our time to really self-reflect. I feel like if we had more time to do that, to really just imagine and be creative and self-reflect, we would probably be living a lot healthier lives, because we would have such an awareness we would have the time to develop an awareness of ourselves and what it is that we really want to be doing. There's so many people, to your point about Americans always asking, what is it that we do? I remember there was a period of time where I would ask people, are you happy with what you do for a living? And it always shocked me how much the answer was no. I'm just doing it just to do it. I'm doing it because it pays. I'm doing it just to survive. But it was never, I rarely got an answer that was like, yes, I love what I do. This is exactly what I've always wanted. Or maybe it wasn't what I always wanted, but I'm so glad that I got to this point. And I love my career. I love my job. Almost no one answers that with a yes. And it always shocks me of like, why are we spending so many hours of our time, right? So much of our work hours it makes up majority of our day. Why are we spending so many hours doing things that we don't love, or that we're not passionate about, or that we don't care about? And it's because of this hustle grind culture, because of capitalism, because of white supremacy, right? It doesn't allow us the space to dream and to reflect. And that's something that I try to ingrain, or I try to share with my clients of, we need time to pause, because we need the time to figure out, is this even what you want to be doing?
Oh my gosh. One, I really love that you started asking people, are you happy with what you're doing? Because a couple of years ago, I noticed myself like falling into that pattern of like how I ask, like how I get to know people. I was like, ooh, I don't actually like that. So I started asking people, are you happy? Just as a person. The amount of people who got mad at me for asking that question. And I was like, I'm not trying to ask because you seem unhappy. I'm just curious. Are you happy? Are you happy today? They got so mad. So that was crazy.
That was an indicator. No,
they're not happy. They're not happy. Okay, now I want to get more into your research. So, how do you believe that systemic inequities affect the mental health of the BIPOC communities?
Oh man, in so many ways. And I think a lot of it has to do with exactly what we were just talking about, the ability to rest and to pause. That in itself is inequitable, because we don't all have equal access to that. And especially BIPOC communities or marginalized communities, where a person who has to work a 9 to 5 and probably work more than one job in order to sustain themselves, in order to take care of their families, in order to keep a roof over their heads, they're not necessarily thinking about, oh, how can I take care of myself? The first priority for them is, how do I meet my basic needs? How do I keep a roof over my head and food on the table? So I hear so much about my clients who do come from marginalized communities of, I don't have time for self-care. I don't have time to check in with myself because I got to make sure I'm taking care of my people and myself in these other ways in which I'm meeting my basic needs. And they're not wrong in doing that, right? That is what they have. Those are the resources that they have. But I think that speaks to the fact of how inequitable that access is to pause. Just think of that, how wild that sounds. Like the ability to pause and to say, hold on, I need a minute to take a break. I need time to myself to get my head together. People, not everyone is afforded that equitably.
It's true. It's like there's this hierarchy of needs. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
I think like on the very bottom, it's like housing and food. And if you don't have that, you can't move on to that next layer. And I forgot what all the layers are, but I know for a fact that it's like housing and food and like water. That's step number 1.
Yes.
What steps can we take to address these?
I think it has to happen on 2 levels, and one level is harder than the other. The harder level is the structural changes, right? Because it's very difficult to make very macro big changes to structures, especially when those structures have been put in place intentionally for a reason and it serves a certain group of people or population who holds power. Right. And so those are the aspects that are harder to change. But I think what needs to change is how we think about work, how we think about what it is that we do and how we spend our time every day, how organizations, whether it's academia, whether it is corporate America, whether it is whatever institution that you are working for or with, but really thinking about it from a human-centered perspective. We come from a culture that's very money-driven. So it's all about money, how to produce and how to make money. And I think that big change has to come from, okay, no, what about the people who are running these systems? What do they need in order to be okay? And how to take care of them, whether it's their health, their mental health. How can we rearrange how we do this so that the people are taken care of, their souls are being taken care of, their bodies are taken care of, their minds are being taken care of, their dreams are being taken care of. It takes a total radical, I think, structural shift. And I think that's the hardest part.
Yeah.
I think what I try to share with clients is the things that they can do and that they do have some control over. And sometimes it's the little things, honestly. So something as simple as checking in with yourself every day, right? Making sure that you have what it is that you need. Doing simple things like 3 times throughout the day, in the morning when you first wake up, in the middle of your day, and right before you go to sleep as you're winding down. Check in with yourself. What is it that I need right now? Do I need a little break? Do I need to ease into the day? Do I need to go for a walk? What is it that I feel my body wants to eat right now? Does it need a little bit of rejuvenation? Does it need a smoothie? Does it need whatever it is, a snack or just something? Do I need a nap? Do I need 10 minutes? Do I need just some time alone? So constantly checking in with what you need, I think, is a really big one. And I think a big part of mindfulness for me is being able to do that. And I'm never going to tell people like, yeah, make sure you take your vacation, make sure you take your breaks, because not everyone is afforded that. No, not everyone has equal access to those things. But I think finding the things that bring you joy and trying to incorporate those things as much as you can. So whether it is, you know what brings me joy is going to this new restaurant, or maybe just spending time with some family, spending time with friends, being in community with others. That's that little bit of joy that I can have control over for today that I can do. And doing those things to pour into yourself. So it sounds super simple, but it's harder to do than it's hard. But I think those things really do at least make a difference in terms of just managing and making sure that it feels a little bit better. It doesn't feel as hard, while at the same time we work on those big structural changes.
Okay. So In today's world, where there's a widening gap between the haves and the have-nots and a disappearing middle class, are you hopeful or fearful for the ability for those of the, I guess I could say BIPOC community, for taking care of their mental health?
Always hopeful as a social worker, but also personally, I'm always going to err on the side of hope because that's just who I am. And not only because I hope for it and I envision it, but I also see us moving in that direction, especially as BIPOC communities, right? There's a lot more attention and awareness now of our mental health and the importance of our mental health. And I was actually having a conversation with a friend of mine about this. I think that the landscape of mental health for BIPOC communities is actually changing. And it needs to change in this direction where it's not just about individually healing, but I think a lot of our healing as BIPOC communities will come from community. Yeah, I think we need both. So it's not just like having an individual therapist, which yes, you should if you can, right? But it's also in community, right? A lot of our healing, a lot of our survival, a lot of us being able to just survive that we have over generations and generations is because of community, which means that a lot of our healing is going to come from community. And so I'm hopeful seeing it shift in this direction because of that. And there's so many great things that we do when we join together and we collaborate with one another, especially again in this society where we don't necessarily have time to dream and to think big. But if we come and we bring all of our ideas together and really create that culture together, I see that being such a big shift. So I'm hopeful in regards to it.
And I love your positivity. And for those listening, stay positive. We're moving on to upwards and better things.
That's right. That's right.
In your work, you also focus on the impostor syndrome amongst those of the BIPOC communities. What are some common triggers for this experience?
Oh, that's great. So a lot of my research focuses on imposter phenomenon, which is the experience of not feeling that you deserve the accolades and the achievements and the successes that you have worked hard for. Always feeling this sense of doubting yourself, doubting if you can accomplish what it is that you've accomplished, even if you have a track history and record of accomplishing these things and accolades. And so for BIPOC, for people who identify as BIPOC in particular, certain triggers, especially, can really dive in and look a little bit different if you are someone who's not part of a marginalized community. As for instance, my part of my research is really tying in. There are historical aspects and reasons as to why BIPOC communities experience imposter phenomenon. It's not just this internal experience that they made up. It's not just something that came out of nowhere, but there's really historical reasons as to why we have been made to feel as if we don't belong, as if we are we operate on at a lesser status or we're inferior to other people. And it's because of racism and discrimination and the history of that within this country, and that's been ingrained in us. And so certain triggers of that for those who identify as BIPOC are things like being in a space or setting where you're not seeing yourself represented much, right? Where you are one of a few or you are the only. And that could be, and I'm saying BIPOC, but I really also mean in terms of really any marginalized or underserved identity that you have, whether it's gender, it's sexuality. It doesn't have to be just only race, religion as well, right? But being in spaces where you're not seeing yourself represented, being in spaces where historically it's been extremely competitive or you've been excluded from it, being in spaces where you are constantly having to prove yourself and your worth over and over again, especially through productivity and projects and all of these things. So you're constantly having to prove that you deserve to be there, right? All of those things are triggers for BIPOC communities when they're in spaces that are, again, predominantly white or predominantly another identity where they're not seeing themselves and where they're constantly then having to prove themselves. And especially when you then take into consideration the history of discrimination in that space or at those institutions, all of that play into why we feel the way that we feel.
And what are some strategies to help individuals combat those feelings?
So again, a lot of my research, it's different in the sense that I can tell you the individual aspect of it, which is important and definitely play a role. But I think, again, the things that we need to consider are really big structural changes. On one half, the structural change would be like our organizations, the places that we work, the places that we reside in, that we spend most of our time in, there needs to be changes on an organizational level. And I say that also very intentionally for the fact that as BIPOC populations and communities, we always run the risk of always overdoing. So we always feel as if, oh, it's our job to fix it. It's our job. It's my fault that I feel this way. And therefore I have to do something to remedy this, without thinking of the fact of actually that onus needs to be on bigger structures and institutions and organizations. There's only so much that we can do.
Yeah.
They also need to create environments in which we feel welcomed, in which we feel safe, and in which we do feel like we belong. And that can look different depending on the institution, on the organization. But I think really catering to the needs and voices of BIPOC communities helps in this case. So really listening, let's say if you are in corporate America, really listening to what are the needs of my BIPOC workers?
Yeah.
What are they saying that they value? What are they saying that they actually need in order to thrive, in order to do an amazing job? Whether it's just being heard more, whether it's having more opportunities to be in leadership positions, whether it's having their ideas valued more, whether it is having more representation, or whether it's even creating structures where access to mental health is actually easy, like where we can make that something that's less of a barrier for them. So listening to the needs and then creating structural changes that really are geared towards those things. I think on an individual level, I think things like remembering for us that our identities are not tied into our work. Our identities and our worth are not tied into what it is that we do, that we are people and human beings and living souls outside of these structures. And really then investing our energy and time into really pouring back into ourselves in those ways. So if organizations are not going to do it, then us being able to very intentionally try to do that on an individual level, and remembering who we are and remembering our histories, remembering where we come from, remembering the greatness and the power that we come from, and really pouring into ourselves that way in order to remind ourselves we can do anything, and we have done anything, and we have done everything, and we will continue to be great and excellent and amazing. And even when we feel like we aren't being great and excellent and amazing, we still are great and excellent and amazing regardless.
Heck yes.
Period.
Now, with all that being said, in recent news, DEI roles have been on the decline. How does that make you feel?
Oh man, that's been difficult because a lot of my experience within academia has also been within the role of being a DEI consultant and working for the DEI office at my institution. And it's been heartbreaking but at the same time, I understand where it's coming from. I understand where a lot of that rhetoric is coming from, which is really to have us regress and have us peel back like all those moments of Black excellence and being able to really have the freedoms and the rights that we do have. And it's a threat. It's a threat to certain people, again, who think that they hold power or are trying to hold power, to then hold their way of holding power is to then oppress other groups. And that's not true power, as we know, right? But I think that's exactly where it comes from. And it makes me sad to see it. However, I think one of the things that continues to give me hope is that no matter how much you try to suppress, we will always find a way to have those efforts come across. So even if it's not named DEI, the things that we're doing is beyond that, right? The things that we do in terms of creating diversity, in terms of maintaining equity, in terms of being inclusive, there's so many ways in which we can and need to do that. It doesn't just all boil down to this one kind of standard of what DEI has looked like over the years. And I think if anything, it just forces us to evolve and forces us to find different ways then of making this world a more equitable and inclusive and diverse space. So I'm very hopeful what we can do and what we've been doing in order to then shift.
So without these like rules like DEI, what are some other things that workplaces and institutions can do when they need to implement or to support the mental health and work-life balance of their employees?
Yeah, I think again, it really goes back to taking it to the heart of things, right? So one of the things that I really take pride in is like when I think of my work and what I do as a social worker, what I do as a clinician, what I do as a researcher, what I do as an educator, is that I always come from a soul-centered, human-centered space. And that's not something that can ever be taken away. You can always integrate that in whatever it is that you are doing. You can't take away the heart of seeing someone and acknowledging someone and getting to know them and understand their needs and then trying to meet that. And I think that's, if anything, that is probably the biggest or one of the biggest weapons that we have to fight back against this attack on DEI. People still have needs. Just because certain people may not want to acknowledge it, we still have certain needs that need to be met in terms of being in community, in terms of healing, in terms of just creating a more equitable environment. And we can do that together, right? But it doesn't have to look again a certain way. It could just be something as simple as, hey, I am going to meet up with some colleagues after work to just blow some steam or just talk about this experience that we had. Do you want to join in? And we can do it over drinks. We can do it over dinner. We can just meet up as a group and have a little informal support.
Yeah, it starts small. It starts with one person, starts with two, and the energy will radiate outwards.
Exactly. Or it could be like, it could be a meetup. It could be like, hey, I see that there's a need for us to have a conversation about this topic. And maybe on an institutional level, when you go through all the bureaucracy, they don't want to do that. But it doesn't mean that we can't meet over dinner and still have these conversations and discussions. So I think a lot of it might be taking it outside of the institutional kind of environment and having that heart-centered, soul-centered like meetups in groups, having it over dinner, having it over lunch, having it just in our own time that feels good outside of work, and then bringing all of that into it just in terms of how we show up. But you don't need the bureaucratic aspect of it in order to do DEI work. You can do this on a personal level, and then how you then show up and how it translates personally will naturally do its thing.
Very valid and good points. Now, looking ahead, what are some emerging trends or areas of need in mindfulness and mental health that you think are crucial for the next generation?
Yeah, I think I really love the fact that this generation, our generation, and I think moving forward, future ones, like we're more open about mental health, right? Our parents, our grandparents, our great parents, they didn't even know what that was. If they did know what it was like, I ain't got time for that. So I'm not even going to do it. But we're a lot more open. We're less secretive about sharing our struggles and sharing our challenges. And we're also a lot more caring towards each other in terms of being like, hey, this resource helped me. Let me share that with you. Or here's something to think about. So we're having these conversations in a way that previous generations did not. And I think that is exciting. And I feel like that's going to continue. I remember the days where therapy was like such a taboo thing. Now it's like,
you don't have a therapist?
What's wrong with you if you're not going to therapy? I love the fact that it's a lot more open and we're having these conversations more out loud and in the spotlight. And I think, again, I said this a lot throughout this interview, but again, community, I think, is where it's at. And I love seeing that shift of we can do this together. We can heal together. We've survived together. We've suffered together. We've endured together, but we can also heal together as well. And it puts a lot less stress on individuals to feel like they need to have it all figured out or that one person can fix them, which is never true, right? But we are in this experience together. And I think seeing more collaborations and just more community healing, whatever that looks like and how it evolves, I think is going to be really beautiful. So I'm hopeful about that as well.
I have another question. We do live in an age where, like our generation, the generations after us, we do overshare. and especially on social media. And now we do use a lot of psychology buzzwords. Oh my gosh, this person's gaslighting me, or I've had people do overuse them. Now, when it comes to oversharing and also sharing resources, how do we, or what is your advice for those who are like more, who go in the direction of using more buzzwords?
I think in a way, I see both sides of the coin, right? On the one hand, it's great that people have more awareness of these terms, right? But I think on the flip side to what you're getting at is that sometimes they are overused or they're not used in the right way. So now everyone on TikTok thinks that they're mental health professionals sharing these ideas. They went to TikTok University and diagnosed someone or diagnosed themselves. Like, you might be on the right page, but it doesn't fully encompass the full thing. And I think being mindful of the fact that there's still a role as to why professionals exist and what it is that we know. So definitely make sure you're collaborating or working with a professional when you're using these terms in order to make sure you're using it in the right way or you're expressing your idea in the right way. Definitely don't self-diagnose. I know that's a big thing in our culture too. Whether it's mental health or just health in general, leave it to the professionals. Like, they've been trained for years in doing this and studying this and researching this and practicing with this. So definitely, it's great. And I'll say this too. On the flip side, it's great. Social media is great in the terms of you have access to this information. It gives you like an idea of, okay, this is what it might be, or this is what it might look like. I need like a Spark Notes version. Cool. Or just a general understanding. But if I want something a little bit more in depth and something more nuanced, which is all of our lives and all of our mental health, it's more complex than just a WebMD page or a TikTok video, right? So if I want something that kind of speaks to that nuance and those complexities a bit more, then I need to then seek out a professional expertise.
One Google search, one psychology book, one TikTok video. It does not make you an expert. Actually, seek out the professionals. Now we're wrapping up, but what are 2 things that you want listeners to take from this conversation?
Oh, that's a good question. There's so much. I guess 2 things one thing I would want listeners to take from this conversation is, number 1, to make sure you're like, again, it looks different for different people and people have different access to it. But making sure that you really take care of yourself and take care of each other. Taking care of each other by first taking care of yourself, whatever that means and whatever that looks like. And I think I will say the one good thing that I think came out of the pandemic is that it really shed light on our mental health needs in a way that we weren't observing before. Forcing all of us, the fact that we couldn't leave our homes for a great period of time, it really shed light on the fact of, number 1, that there's more to life outside of just work. But also, it forces us to really sit with ourselves and to really then figure out, what do I need then to stay sane? What do I need to stay healthy and to feel like my best? Because the things that I was doing was always like on grind mode. I maybe didn't even have a chance to think about that. But when you're home and you have a lot of time on your hands, now you're sitting with yourself like, wait, how is that sustainable? How was I doing 100 million jobs like that, or working so many hours and making it work? So really take the time to invest in yourself, whatever that means and looks like, even if it's 5 minutes a day, even if it's something as simple as, I'm going to just, whatever I need to just feel calm today or feel a little more calm, right? You might not feel 100% less anxious, but even just making it a little bit more manageable, invest in yourself in those ways and do those things. So that would be one takeaway. And then I guess my second takeaway would be, I would want listeners to know that they are also doing the best that they can. And that's really all that they are responsible for. And a lot of the changes that need to happen are really more big structural changes. And those things, again, are harder to change. But all anyone is responsible for is really just doing the best that they can with what they have. And you're doing the best that you can with all that you have. So give yourself grace. Don't be hard on yourself. And as long as you're making those little decisions and those little choices to just invest and pour into you and check in on your people and make sure they're good and spread one little glimmer of kindness to someone else, if that is all you have control over that day, then you're doing amazing.
And I want to call out something that you just said, spreading one little glimmer of kindness to someone else. It's like a tree branch where you don't actually see the impact that you have, but a smile and a hello and a kind helping of someone else really goes a long way.
Wonders. It does absolute wonders. You never know what that one glance and look of acknowledgement towards someone, what that means to somebody. Yeah. So that's everything. And that's all you got to do. It branches and it ripples off after that. So yes.
Gerri, thank you so much for your time today. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode of PausePoint, the podcast. Our debut season is packed with enlightening conversations featuring thought leaders, burnout prevention specialists, authors, and mindfulness coaches. Together, we delve into topics like effective stress management, burnout, goal setting, and transformative mindfulness techniques. PausePoint is dedicated to enhancing well-being by seamlessly integrating mindfulness into your daily routine. Our innovative tool syncs with your calendar to identify optimal times for mindfulness breaks, making mindfulness an integrated part of your day without disrupting your schedule. Your journey to a more balanced life starts here. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to visit pausepoint.io to begin your mindfulness journey today. We look forward to having you with us next time.